Okay, let's jump right into this fun story. Imagine a little neighborhood where everything is super quiet and nice. Birds are chirping happily, the sun is shining bright, and the air feels warm and cozy. That's where I live. Hi, I'm Jake. I'm just a regular guy who likes simple things. One of my favorite things is my wind chimes. They hang outside my house and make a soft, pretty jingle when the wind blows. It's like music that makes me smile and keeps everything calm. I love sitting on my porch, sipping lemonade, and listening to them. To me, it's the best sound ever. But not everyone feels the same way. Nope, not at all. Let me tell you about Karen. She's my neighbor, and oh boy, she's something else. Karen is like the boss of our street, or at least, she thinks she is. She's part of this group called the HOA, which stands for Homeowners Association. It's a fancy name for people who make rules about how our houses and yards should look. Karen loves those rules. She walks around like she's the queen, checking everyone's houses to make sure everything is perfect. If your grass grows just a tiny bit too long, like half an inch, she'll give you a mean stare. If your mailbox is a little crooked, she'll knock on your door and complain. She's that kind of person. Now, here's where the trouble starts. Karen does not like my wind chimes. Not even a little bit. She hates them so much, you'd think they were screaming in her ears. Every time the wind blows and they jingle, she gets mad. Really mad. The first time she noticed them, she stomped over to my house with her arms crossed tight across her chest. Her face was all scrunched up, like she just ate a sour lemon. "Jake," she yelled, pointing at my chimes. "Those things are noise pollution. They're too loud. They're driving me crazy." I just stood there on my porch, holding my lemonade, and smiled at her. "Hi, Karen," I said, nice and calm. "They're not that loud. They're just little chimes. Don't you think they sound pretty?" But she didn't answer. She just huffed, turned around, and marched back to her house. I thought, okay, maybe she's having a bad day. She'll get over it. I figured she'd forget about my wind chimes after a while. People get mad sometimes, but then they move on, right? Wrong. So wrong. Karen didn't forget. She didn't get over it at all. Instead, she kept coming back. Every few days, there she was again, standing in my yard, complaining about the same thing. "Jake, those chimes have to go," she'd say. "They're ruining the neighborhood." I'd look at her and nod, still smiling, because I didn't want to fight. I like peace. I like keeping things easy. But inside, I was starting to wonder why she cared so much. It's just a little jingle. What's the big deal? Here's the funny part, though, the part Karen didn't know. While she was busy yelling at me, something big was brewing. Something she never saw coming. See, I'm a guy who pays attention. I notice things. And lately, I'd been noticing stuff about Karen that didn't add up. Little hints. Little clues. She thought she was the perfect neighbor, always bossing everyone around, but I had a feeling there was more to her story. A secret. A big one. And soon, that secret was going to turn everything upside down, especially for her. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. I'll tell you more about that later. For now, picture me, Jake, just trying to enjoy my quiet days with my wind chimes. And picture Karen, stomping around, thinking she's in charge of everything. She had no idea what was waiting for her. No idea at all. Her big meltdown, the one she thought she'd throw at me, was about to blow up right in her face. And trust me, it's going to be good. You'll want to stick around for this. So, here's a question for you: have you ever had a nosy neighbor like Karen? Someone who's always in your business, telling you what to do? Tell me about it below. I bet some of you have stories just as wild as mine. Maybe your neighbor complained about your dog barking or your bike in the yard. Whatever it is, I want to hear it. Because let me tell you, dealing with Karen was like living in a real-life show. Every day, I wondered what she'd do next. The thing is, I didn't fight back, at least, not yet. I kept things cool. I'd wave at her, say hi, and let her ramble on. "Karen," I'd say, "they're just wind chimes. They're not hurting anyone." But she'd shake her head and storm off, muttering under her breath. I could tell she was planning something. She wasn't going to let this go. And that's when I started to get curious. Why was she so worked up? What was making her act like this? I didn't know it then, but I was about to find out. See, my neighborhood isn't just a quiet place with birds and sunshine. It's a place where secrets hide. And Karen? She had the biggest secret of all. She thought she could keep picking on me and my wind chimes, but she didn't know the tables were about to turn. Big time. Imagine sitting on my porch, listening to those chimes, and watching Karen glare at me from across the street. That's how it started. A simple guy, a few wind chimes, and a neighbor who couldn't stand them. Sounds like no big deal, right? But oh, it was. It was the start of something crazy. Something that would make everyone in the neighborhood talk for weeks. So, stick with me, okay? This story is just getting started. We've got Karen acting like the queen of the street, me chilling with my chimes, and a big surprise waiting around the corner. What do you think happens next? Any guesses? I'll give you a hint, Karen's about to learn a lesson she'll never forget. And my wind chimes. They're going to keep on jingling, louder than ever. Tell me in the comments, what would you do if someone kept bugging you about something small, like wind chimes? Would you ignore them? Talk back. I can't wait to see what you say. Let's keep this going because trust me, the best part is coming soon. Okay, let's dive into the next part of this crazy story. Things were starting to heat up in my little neighborhood, and it all began with something small. Karen, my grumpy neighbor, wasn't happy with my wind chimes. At first, she didn't say much, just gave me those mean looks from across the street. But then, she started doing more. One morning, I opened my front door, and there it was, a nasty little note stuck right on the wood. It said, "Take those chimes down or else," in big, angry letters. I read it, chuckled to myself, and tossed it in the trash. Karen was loud and bossy, but I figured she was all talk. She wouldn't really do anything, right? I mean, it's just wind chimes. Oh boy, was I wrong. Karen wasn't playing around. She kept coming back with more notes. Every few days, I'd find another one. "Those chimes are awful," one said. "Get rid of them now," said another. I'd laugh each time, thinking she'd tire herself out eventually. She was like a dog barking at a squirrel, just noise, no real bite. I'd sip my lemonade on the porch, listen to my chimes jingle in the breeze, and shake my head. Karen, 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 I thought. Why do you care so much? But then, one day, things got louder. I was outside watering my flowers when I saw her. There she was, standing on her porch, staring at me with her arms crossed. Her face was all red and scrunched up, like she was about to explode. She started muttering to herself. I couldn't hear the words, but I could tell she was mad. Really mad. Then, she pointed at me and yelled across the street, "Those chimes are driving me crazy, Jake. I can't take it anymore. I'm calling the cops." I stopped watering and looked at her, kind of surprised. The cops? For wind chimes? I shrugged my shoulders and said, "Go ahead, Karen. Call them. I'm pretty sure they've got bigger problems than my little chimes." She huffed, turned around, and stomped back inside her house, slamming the door so hard I could hear it from my yard. I laughed a little and went back to my flowers. Cops weren't going to care about this. It was silly. But here's where the story gets juicy. While Karen was busy yelling and leaving notes, I started noticing something strange. Something really weird. See, I'm the kind of guy who pays attention. I like watching what's going on around me. And lately, I'd seen cop cars driving by our street. Not fast, like they were chasing someone, but slow. Really slow. They'd roll past Karen's house, pause for a second, and then keep going. It happened more than once, maybe 3 or 4 times in a week. I'd be out on my porch, and there they were again, creeping by like they were watching something. Or someone. Karen didn't notice. Not even a little bit. She was too busy glaring at me or shouting about my chimes. She'd stand in her yard, shaking her fist, saying stuff like, "You're ruining everything, Jake." Meanwhile, those cop cars kept showing up, quiet and sneaky. I'd sip my lemonade and watch, wondering what was going on. Why were they here? What were they looking at? And then it hit me, maybe this wasn't about me at all. Maybe this was about her. I didn't say anything. I kept it to myself. I'm not the type to start trouble, I just like my peace and quiet. But inside, my brain was buzzing. What's she hiding? I thought. Karen acted like she was perfect, like she could boss everyone around because she was better than us. But those cop cars made me think she wasn't so perfect after all. Maybe she was up to something. Something sneaky. Something bad. The more I thought about it, the more tense things felt. It was like the air in the neighborhood got heavier. Karen kept coming over, complaining louder every time. I hear those chimes all night, she'd yell. They're giving me headaches. I'd smile and say, sorry, Karen, but they're staying. She'd storm off, and I'd watch her go, feeling like something big was coming. I couldn't explain it, it was just a feeling in my gut. Like when you know a storm's about to hit, even if the sky still looks clear. One afternoon, I was raking leaves in my yard when I saw another cop car. It rolled by super slow, just like before. The windows were dark, so I couldn't see who was inside, but it stopped right in front of Karen's house for a few seconds. Then it drove off. Karen was inside, I could see her shadow moving behind her curtains, but she didn't come out. She had no idea they were there. I leaned on my rake and stared. What's going on with you, Karen? I wondered. What don't you want us to know? The tension kept building. Every time Karen yelled at me, I'd look at her house and think about those cars. She'd say stuff like, "You're the worst neighbor ever, Jake," and I'd just nod, keeping my mouth shut. I didn't want her to know I was watching her, too. I didn't want her to know I was starting to figure things out. Because the more she complained, the more I realized, this wasn't just about wind chimes. This was about something way bigger. It was like a game now. Karen thought she was winning, bossing me around and making a fuss. But I had a secret, I'd seen those cop cars. I knew something was up. And I had a feeling she was about to get a big surprise. A really big one. I didn't know what it was yet, but I could feel it coming, like when you're waiting for the best part of a movie. My chimes kept jingling, soft and sweet, and Karen kept yelling. But behind it all, something was brewing. Something that was going to change everything. All right, let's keep this story rolling. Things were getting wilder every day in my little neighborhood, and Karen, my grumpy neighbor, wasn't slowing down. Days went by, and she just got louder and louder. She wasn't happy with just leaving notes anymore, nope, she started banging on my door like she was trying to break it down. I'm serious, Jake, she'd yell, her voice all sharp and angry. Those chimes are a menace. They're ruining my life. I'd peek out my window, staying quiet, and watch her. She'd stand there on my porch, pacing back and forth with her phone in her hand, dialing someone I didn't know who. Maybe her friends? Maybe the HOA people? I wasn't sure, but she looked mad, like a volcano about to burst. I didn't open the door. I'd just wait until she got tired and left. Then I'd sit back on my couch and listen to my wind chimes jingle outside. They sounded so nice, like little bells dancing in the wind. But Karen? She acted like they were the worst thing ever. Every time she came over, I'd think, wow, she really hates those chimes. It was kind of funny, but also kind of annoying. I mean, they're just chimes. Why was she so upset? While Karen kept yelling, I started paying more attention to her. I'm a curious guy, I like noticing things. And lately, I'd seen some weird stuff about Karen that didn't make sense. Little clues were popping up, like puzzle pieces I didn't know how to put together yet. For example, her trash bins were always full, way more full than mine or anyone else's on the street. I'd walk by on trash day, and there they were, overflowing with strange things. Shredded papers, all torn up like she didn't want anyone to read them. Empty paint cans, tons of them, stacked up high. And weird boxes, big ones and small ones, all smashed flat. That was odd, right? Karen acted like she was the perfect neighbor. She'd walk around with her nose in the air, telling everyone how to keep their yards neat and their houses pretty. But her trash? It looked like a mess. Why would someone so bossy have so much junk? What was she doing with all that paint? And why was she ripping up papers? I started wondering if she was hiding something. Maybe she wasn't as perfect as she wanted us to think. Days turned into weeks, and Karen kept coming back. One time, she stood in my yard, waving her arms like a crazy person. "Jake, I can't sleep because of those stupid chimes," she shouted. "They jingle all night long." I leaned out my window and said, "Karen, they're not that loud. Maybe you need earplugs." She glared at me, her eyes all squinted, and stomped off. I could hear her muttering as she went, something about teaching me a lesson. I just shook my head and closed the window. But while she was busy screaming at me, I kept my eyes open. Those cop cars I'd seen before? They didn't stop coming. They'd roll by her house, slow and quiet, like they didn't want anyone to notice. I'd be outside watering my plants or sweeping my porch, and there they'd go creeping past Karen's place. Sometimes they'd stop for a second, then drive away. Karen never saw them. She was too busy pacing and yelling at me. Then one night, something bigger happened. I was inside, reading a book, when I heard sirens. Not super loud, just soft and close. I put my book down and peeked out my window. Guess what I saw? 2 cop cars, parked right by Karen's house. Their lights weren't flashing, but they were there, sitting in the dark. I rubbed my eyes to make sure I wasn't dreaming. Yup, 2 cars, right outside her yard. My heart started beating a little faster. What's going on? I thought. I looked closer. Karen's house was all lit up. She was still awake. I could hear her voice, loud and angry, coming from her side of the fence. She was yelling at me again. "Jake, those chimes are the worst," she shouted. "I'm done with this." She didn't even see the cop cars sitting there, just a few feet away. She was too busy waving her arms and complaining about, you guessed it, my wind chimes. I smirked to myself, leaning against the window. Oh, Karen, I thought. You've got no idea what's coming. The cops were right there, and she didn't even notice. I stayed quiet, watching. The cars didn't move, they just sat there, like they were waiting for something. Karen kept ranting, her voice bouncing off the houses. "I'm going to call someone tomorrow," she yelled. "This is ridiculous." Then she marched back inside, slamming her door so hard it made my chimes jingle a little louder. I stared at those cop cars for a long time. Why were they here? What were they waiting for? And why was it always Karen's house they stopped by? My brain was spinning with questions. Those clues, the trash, the paint cans, the shredded papers, started feeling bigger. Maybe Karen wasn't just a loud neighbor. Maybe she was up to something sneaky. Something the cops knew about. The next day, I kept watching. Karen didn't come over, but I saw her outside, dragging more trash to her bins. More boxes, more cans. She looked nervous, glancing around like she didn't want anyone to see. I stayed on my porch, pretending to read, but really, I was keeping an eye on her. Another cop car drove by that afternoon, slow, just like always. Karen didn't look up. She was too busy stuffing her bins. I started to feel like a detective in one of those mystery shows. Little things were adding up, and I couldn't stop thinking about them. Karen's yelling was getting worse, the cop cars kept coming, and her trash was weirder every day. It was like a storm was building, and I was right in the middle of it. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I knew it was going to be big. Really big. My wind chimes kept jingling, soft and happy, while all this was going on. Karen thought they were the problem, but I was starting to think she was the real problem. She could yell all she wanted, but something was coming for her. Something she couldn't shout away. I smirked again, sipping my lemonade. "Keep yelling, Karen," I thought. "You're in for a surprise." Okay, here we go. This is where the story gets super exciting. Everything explodes in this part, and you won't believe what happens next. It all went down on a sunny afternoon. The sky was blue, the birds were singing, and my wind chimes were jingling like always. I was outside, just chilling in my yard, when Karen finally lost it. I mean, she really lost it this time. She'd been mad before, but this was a whole new level of crazy. She marched right over to my yard, her shoes stomping the grass like she was on a mission. Her face was red, her eyes were wild, and she was holding her phone up like a weapon. She didn't even say hi, she just started yelling. "That's it, Jake. I've had enough," she shouted. Then she pressed some buttons on her phone and held it to her ear. I crossed my arms and watched, trying hard not to laugh. She was so worked up, it was almost funny. "Yes, hello," she said into the phone, loud enough for the whole street to hear. "This is 911. There's a disturbance. This guy's wind chimes are ruining my life." I stood there, leaning against my porch, and bit my lip to keep from giggling. Ruining her life? My little Chimes. I could hear the operator's voice crackling through the phone, all calm and quiet. "Ma'am, we'll send someone out," the lady said. Karen nodded, looking smug, like she'd just won a big prize. "Good," she snapped, then hung up and glared at me. "You're in trouble now, Jake." I didn't say anything. I just shrugged and kept my arms crossed. Inside, I was cracking up. Calling 911 over wind chimes. That's the silliest thing I'd ever heard. I figured the cops would show up, roll their eyes, and tell her to calm down. No big deal, right? But oh boy, was I in for a surprise. And so was Karen. Because guess what? The cops were already here. Yup, already here. And not for me, for her. Here's how it went down. While Karen was ranting and waving her phone around, something amazing happened. 2 police officers stepped out from behind her hedges. Yup, those big bushes she had in her yard, they'd been hiding there the whole time. I hadn't seen them either, so my eyes got wide. Karen didn't notice at first, she was too busy staring me down, thinking she'd won. But then she heard their boots crunching on the gravel. She froze. Slowly, she turned around, and her jaw dropped so fast it almost hit the ground. What are you doing here?" she stammered, her voice all shaky. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. The 2 cops didn't smile. They stood there, tall and serious, in their blue uniforms. One of them was holding a clipboard with some papers on it. He stepped forward and said, "Karen Mitchell." She nodded, still confused, her eyes darting around like she wanted to run. The cop held up the clipboard. "We've got a warrant," he said, all calm and firm. "We've been watching you for weeks, illegal dumping, fraud, you name it." Karen's face went from red to white in about 2 seconds. She opened her mouth to talk, but nothing came out. She just stood there, blinking, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. I couldn't believe it either. I mean, I knew something was up with her, those cop cars, the weird trash, but this was huge. My wind chimes kept jingling in the background, soft and happy, while everything else fell apart for Karen. The other cop started talking. "Ma'am, we've got proof," he said. "You've been dumping toxic junk in places you're not allowed to. And you've been faking HOA fees, taking money from neighbors and keeping it for yourself." My jaw dropped now. Toxic junk? Stealing money? Karen wasn't just a grumpy neighbor, she was a sneaky criminal. All this time, she'd been acting like the queen of the street, bossing everyone around, when really, she was the one breaking the rules. Big rules. I remembered all those clues, the shredded papers, the paint cans, the strange boxes in her trash. It all made sense now. She wasn't just messy, she was hiding stuff. Bad stuff. The cops had been watching her for weeks, waiting for the right moment. And that moment? It was right now, in my yard, while she was yelling about my chimes. Talk about perfect timing. Karen finally found her voice. "This is ridiculous," she squeaked, waving her hands. "I didn't do anything. It's those chimes, they're the problem." The cops didn't even blink. The one with the clipboard shook his head. "Ma'am, this isn't about wind chimes," he said. "This is about you. We've got evidence. You're coming with us." Karen's eyes got huge, and she took a step back, but there was nowhere to go. The second cop stepped closer, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. I couldn't help it, I grinned. My wind chimes. They were the least of her problems now. All those times she'd banged on my door, left nasty notes, and yelled at me, she thought she was in charge. But the whole time, the cops were onto her. She'd been so busy hating my chimes that she didn't see the real trouble sneaking up. And now, here it was, staring her in the face. The neighbors started peeking out their windows. I could see curtains moving and heads popping up. Everyone wanted to know what was happening. Karen saw them too, and her face got even redder. "This is a mistake," she yelled, But the cops weren't listening. They turned her around, and I heard the click of the handcuffs snapping onto her wrists. She squirmed and shouted, "Let me go. I'm innocent." But the cops just led her toward their car, parked right by her house. I stood there, arms still crossed, watching it all. My chimes jingled in the breeze, like they were laughing too. Karen had called 911 on me, thinking she'd get me in trouble, but instead, she'd walked right into her own mess. The operator didn't even need to send anyone, the cops were already here, ready to nab her. It was the best twist ever. So, there it was, the big reveal. Karen wasn't just a loud, nosy neighbor. She'd been running a shady side gig, breaking laws and trashing stuff she shouldn't have. All while pretending to be perfect. My wind chimes. They were just an excuse for her to yell. The real problem was her, and now everyone knew it. What a day. Stick around, this story's not over yet. Okay, let's wrap up this wild part of the story. After the big reveal, things got even better. The cops didn't waste any time, they put handcuffs on Karen right there in my yard. Her face turned as red as a ripe tomato, and she looked so mad she could have popped. "This is ridiculous," she screeched, her voice all high and squeaky. She twisted and turned as the cops held her arms, leading her to their car parked by her house. "Let me go," she yelled, but they didn't listen. They just kept walking her away, calm and steady. I stood on my porch, arms crossed, and gave her a little wave. "Bye, Karen," I said under my breath, smiling big. My wind chimes tinkled in the breeze, making that soft, happy sound I loved so much. To me, it felt like sweet, sweet victory. All her yelling, all her mean notes, they didn't matter anymore. She was caught, and my chimes were still hanging right where they belonged. The neighbors couldn't believe it either. People started peeking out from behind their curtains, whispering to each other. I saw old Mr. Johnson across the street shake his head, and Mrs. Lee next door came out on her porch, watching with wide eyes. Turns out, Karen had been bossing everyone around for years, telling us how to mow our lawns, where to park our cars, even what color our mailboxes should be. But now, everyone knew the truth. She'd been hiding her own big mess while pointing fingers at us. What a sneaky trick. A few days later, something cool happened. The HOA, the group Karen used to boss around, sent a letter to all of us. I opened mine and read it with a grin. It said Karen was gone for good. No more yelling, no more rules from her. They were reviewing all the crazy stuff she'd made us do, like how long our grass could grow or how loud we could play music. I bet they'd throw out a lot of it. My wind chimes. They weren't going anywhere. The letter didn't even mention them. I laughed and taped it to my fridge, just to remember the day Karen got what she deserved. After that, the street felt different. Lighter. Freer. People smiled more when they walked by. Kids played outside without Karen glaring at them. Even the birds seemed happier, chirping louder than before. I'd sit on my porch every evening, listening to my chimes jingle, and feel so good. No more banging on my door. No more nasty notes. Just peace and quiet, well, quiet except for my chimes, of course. And me? I slept better than ever. I'd lie in bed at night, windows open, hearing that soft tinkle in the breeze. It was like the sound of justice, ringing out loud and clear. Karen thought she could scare me, but in the end, she was the one who got caught. My chimes stayed, and she was gone. That's what I call a happy ending. Alright, let's finish this story with something to think about. Here's the big lesson I learned from all this craziness with Karen and my wind chimes: sometimes the loudest complainers are the ones hiding the biggest secrets. Think about it. Karen was always yelling, pointing fingers, and acting like she was better than everyone else. She'd stomp around, telling me my chimes were awful, trying to boss me and the whole neighborhood around. She thought she could control everything like she was the queen of our street. But guess what? In the end, she tripped right over her own lies. All that shouting couldn't hide what she was really up to. It's funny when you look back at it. Karen spent so much time complaining about my little wind chimes, but she was the one with the real problem. She was sneaking around, breaking rules, and making a mess literally. Those trash cans full of weird stuff, the cops watching her house, it all came crashing down on her. She didn't see it coming, but I did. Well, kind of. I knew something was up, even if I didn't know the whole story until that wild day in my yard. This whole thing taught me something cool: don't judge someone by something small, like their wind chimes. You might think you know who's right or who's wrong just by looking at them, but you don't always see the full picture. Karen judged me and thought I was the troublemaker because of that soft jingle. But in the end, she was the one in trouble, and I was just a guy enjoying my porch. You never know who's really got the upper hand, who's got the power, until the truth comes out. I think that's a pretty neat idea. It makes me wonder about other people, too. Maybe the ones who talk the loudest or act the toughest are trying to hide something. Maybe they're not as strong as they pretend to be. And maybe the quiet ones like me, just sitting there with my lemonade, have more going on than you think. It's like a secret superpower, staying calm and letting the truth do the talking. So, what do you think? Did Karen get what she deserved? I say yes. She tried to scare me, but she ended up scaring herself right into those handcuffs. Drop your answer in the comments below. I really want to hear what you think. Did you cheer when the cops showed up? Were you surprised by her sneaky secrets? Tell me everything. And hey, if you like this wild tale, give it a big thumbs up. It was a crazy ride, right? From notes on my door to cops in my yard, it's a story I'll never forget. My wind chimes are still jingling, and I'm still smiling. See you next time for more fun stories, because who knows what'll happen around here next. Keep being awesome, and don't let anyone dull your jingle.